So I'll close up here with a little of the free speech talk. That's why you guys come here to watch Jeff Tidwell's tweet videos. You know that I love the topic of free speech, and not so much. I'm agnostic on the modern religion that is known as censorship. So let me just talk a little bit about peace and truth, and it's just going to go over the elements that I see as I consider myself a free speech absolutist, but there are limits to my views on free speech. And these are more, don't let anybody tell you what free speech should be defined as, because that is authoritarian by nature. I'm being an authoritarian when I tell you what free speech should be. So be very critical, people that do this. But I'm going to do it anyway, and you've been warned. You've been primed to understand. So peace and truth. And this was under my position on free speech. I'll be doing a future video going over all of my positions in one video. It might be called Jeff Tidwell 2024. We will see. Free speech absolutism is the best guideline, with notable exceptions including, number 1, credible threats of violence, including incitement. Number 2, unconsented pornography. Number 3, direct harm or endangerment to others, like saying fire in a crowded theater. And 4, libel, slander, defamation, and doxing. So those are the biggest caution points, the points where I'd like to focus when discussing the fringes of what should be allowed in terms of free speech. Now, I'm not talking about free speech as limited by a document or defined by a document, such as the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States of America, but I'm talking about the philosophical concept, the Enlightenment era belief, the long-term philosophical concept for thousands of years of what, the human right that is free speech. So first here we have credible threats of violence, including incitement. Now this is where a lot of, censorship lovers or disciples of the modern religion of censorship will come in seeking moral virtue and universal truth through silencing other people and crafting, culturally engineering the environment for us all to share. It'll be safer for all. And somebody makes some arbitrary choices about what is hate speech or what is this or what is that. They come up with all these terms in a postmodern sense, and then they say, well, we're going to enforce this. We're going to go to the prophets. We're going to go to the popes of this modern religion and enforce this dogma to make sure that people are virtuous. And of course, are they? Well, in many ways, morality is subjective. We all have our own sense of what is moral and what isn't. So it all comes down to which authority you'd like to appeal to. So credible threats of violence, including incitement. So I don't think we should be inciting violence. I don't think we should have credible threats. I don't think that we should be able to just go onto Twitter or Facebook or anywhere, even in public, and just say, I'm threatening you. I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to send a bomb to you. I'm going to shoot you or punch you. I'm going to do this to you. I'm going to do this to your friends, to your family. I don't think we should allow any of that. I don't think we should be encouraging it. Now, of course, there are situations where, it may not be as serious. There's certainly, these aren't places where I'd take an absolute position. Okay? The free speech absolutism has already been compromised, folks. Okay? So I'm willing to compromise and say, well, hey, let's look at this case by case by case by case. Every situation is different. Analogies are often not the best choice when you're in a discussion like this, because every situation is different. But we really shouldn't be the credible threats. If it's a credible threat of violence, it shouldn't be encouraged in the public square. Next up is number 2, unconsented pornography. So children cannot consent to pornography. Okay, and people when people are on social media, or they're doing chats, or they're sending text messages, right? Or if you take a picture of somebody, if you release pornographic imagery that was not meant for public use, say if you were with your spouse or partner, and the two of you decide to get together and get randy and record some pornography, and they said, well, this is for our private use. This is for our private use, and I don't want you to release this. I've not given my consent for you to release this pornography onto the public square, onto the internet. And then the other person goes and does it. Well, I don't think we should be encouraging that. Revenge porn or any kind of unconsented porn. Obviously, CP should not be allowed anywhere because children cannot consent in any sense of the word. So when we talk about free speech, and we talk about free speech absolutism, some people say, well, what do you want? Do you want people to just release all this awful stuff? And I'm like, ideally, no. But it's not my right to tell you what is acceptable and what isn't. I can only offer an opinion. But when you start putting it into law and applying absolute authority, well, that's where we start to get into a little bit of trouble. Now, if society in general, if the broad, massive, vast consensus says that this should not be allowed, well, we can consider that and say, well, if 80 or 90% of people all agree about this, then maybe we should just prevent it and hope that the counterculture that always grows when you prevent a culture, a counterculture always appears, and there's a counterculture for every counterculture. Like in my new tweet, Counterculture Clash. There'll be a video about that someday as well. I talk about that. But yeah, there's always going to be a force. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So if you censor something, there'll be a black market for it. There will be another place where it pops up. You don't just get rid of it from reality itself. But unconsented pornography is a blight, and we should be trying to eliminate it as much as possible. Number 3, of course, direct harm or endangerment to others. So if you say fire in a crowded theater, as many libertarians and free speech folks know, if you say fire in a crowded theater, it can cause people to panic and run around and bump into each other, and people can get hurt. You don't want that. You don't want that to happen. So you don't want to have anything that causes direct harm. You know, is it free speech when someone says, you know, when you have a military general, maybe Soleimani, and he says, fire, fire. And someone fires, of course they have agency, they can make the choice to fire on somebody or not, but he gives that order. Yeah, he has the free speech to do that, but it is direct harm. It is direct harm. So there's all these different ways you can look at free speech. Come to your own conclusions. So you don't want to do anything that endangers others. These are just ideals, of course, exceptions to the absolutism. And there are more, but I covered these ones here in one tweet. Finally, this is a difficult area, especially in the internet age, but this is libel, slander, defamation, and doxing. So libel, slander, and defamation. In the social media era where there are millions of people on forums and on social media sites and all across the World Wide Web, I learned that term back on CompuServe, there are so many people saying things that could be, you know, in the old days would have been considered libel. Oh, you're lying about me. You're spreading false information. You're spreading things that may or may not be true. You're spreading disinformation. You're spreading misinformation. The difference being between dis and misinformation is like intention. Disinformation is intentional. Misinformation may be intentional. But you're slandering me. You're saying things that aren't true. You're saying things that are harmful to me. Some of which may be true, but might have been private, or so on and so forth. There's so many different ways people define these words. Defamation, just flagrant false lies. False lies, there's some redundancy for you. So in this day and age, when people are like insulting each other every day on social media, and there's so much access to celebrities and politicians and important figures all across the world, and people just have this access. They can start an alt account, they can do this or do that, and they can put out all this defamatory information. It's really hard to litigate this. Like, lawyers have talked about it. The defamation, libel, and slander in the information age. It's a big problem, but it's hard to think of a solution. But we do have this other thing that is an invasion of privacy and is something that I don't think should be encouraged, let's say, under free speech, and that is doxing. Doxing is when you share someone's personal information, such as that they haven't made publicly available. If they've made it publicly available in some respect, it's not doxing. There are some fringe cases where somebody had to really dig for an address or a phone number. But when somebody releases, say, your ID online, your driver's license or your state ID, or if someone releases your passport or something that's truly private, your credit card number, that's a case where it's overt, obvious doxing. And you shouldn't be able to just release people's private information. That goes against our Fourth Amendment, of course. In some respect, may it be philosophical or literal, based on the law and legalism. We value privacy in a free country. We value privacy under the Constitution. So doxing, releasing people's information without their consent, yeah, we shouldn't be encouraging that. So that's 4 points about free speech where, I make exceptions. I say, free speech absolutism, I don't want to block people from speaking, but when it comes to these things, I can see where there's friction and maybe places where, on a subjective, contextual basis, we should just go ahead and say, no. And of course, it's an arbitrary decision when someone is censored.